Welcome to the Modern Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Dave. I'm joined with my co-host Greg. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
You having a good little day?
I'm having a great week in general.
Great week.
Yeah, you know,
Why?
this topic is
Tell me everything that's happening.
well, so much. This topic itself has given me some great perspective. Dave and I both read a book for this week's episode,
Sure.
as we do sometimes. A short one, small one. We do
But Greg, can we go back to how your week's doing?
You know, a lot of overall good. Some ups
Everyone wants to know the exact details of how your week's been. Like what made it good?
Took the kids out for ice cream. It started pouring rain, and that became like I think that's going to be a core memory because we all ran to the car. You know what I mean? So I think that's.
Let's get back into the podcast. This is boring. No, I'm just kidding. That's adorable.
Yeah. See, this is why I don't talk about my private life. It's boring.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Yeah, that's actually a really nice thing to point out. It's like memory is like something as benign as just running in the rain can turn into one of those things that like you think about later on and you kind of like cherish that moment, right?
Oh yeah, and as a kid, you don't know what they're going to be, but as an adult, you can see it in the kids. You're like, oh, they're locking this one in.
You know what?
I mean, when the rain's hitting the hot street and like that smell, it's like everything, you know?
When you're old and all your kids have left you and you're just sitting there lonely.
Yeah. And they're not visiting me. They're not visiting me in the mental hospital. And I'm saying, but remember the rain? Remember the rain? And that's what I keep saying. And that's how
nobody knows what you're talking about.
Right. But that's how I bring us around to this beautiful topic. Me sitting in the mental hospital, kind of sad. Because in the late 1800s, Dave, there were a lot of rumors about how people were being treated in the lunatic asylums. Well, I mean, they were called lunatic and insane asylums and houses for the feeble-minded and state prisons. They had all these negative connotations. So we kind of have to use that because we are talking about the late 1800s. But
I don't think that's an excuse, though.
I'm sorry.
I'm judging them.
Mental health institutions. That's what we want to call them. But one woman, our hero, would have the courage to act insane, have herself committed, and find out for herself, creating what we know today as investigative journalism. She essentially, and we'll talk about that later on, but she essentially invented investigative journalism.
Her name was Winona Ryder. No.
Her name was Nelly. Her pen name's Nelly Bly, but she was born. Well, before we say that, it's important to know that that not only were there rumors about how people were being treated in these places, it's the stuff they were being treated for. So of course they had, schizophrenia and bipolar, probably, Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities, but also just like they were poor or like they didn't feel good. But
they're just having a rough go.
My neighbor, he is an architect. That's making me sound like I come from a really fancy neighborhood, but I don't.
Is his name Picasso?
He's a very low level architect. Sorry, Matt, but he is. And he said that they were gutting a hospital, like a state hospital, and he came across this sheet where all the people who were committed and what they were committed for. And he said like 60% of it was masturbation. And I was like, interesting.
Chronic masturbation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you would have to what do you consider chronic, I guess. But is it ever a reason to be hospitalized? I'm not sure. Maybe. But not on that level. Anyways, we're talking today about Elizabeth Jane Cochran, otherwise known as Nelly Bly, the famous Nelly Bly, who wrote the book 10 Days in a Madhouse, which you read, Dave.
Yeah, she's super famous. So famous, I just found out about her 10 days ago.
Yeah. Okay, so she used to be pretty famous. But we should, that's the point of the podcast, right? Like bringing this stuff back to light.
Talking about things that nobody has ever had an interest in and trying to make them interested in it.
That's right.
That's the point of the podcast.
That's basically what our podcast is. If we were going to run an ad, that's what it would say. So she was born pretty, well-to-do. She had a very successful father. Things started off well for her. She was born in Cochrane. That's her last name. So you know that if you're born in a place that's like named after your family name, things are going pretty well. But her father died pretty early on.
Yeah.
And this left her in a rough spot.
Yep.
Yeah, it was sad. It was sad because her father had a previous marriage with like 6 kids and her mother had 5 children. And back then it was pretty tough for women. We're talking like 1800s, like late, like 1870s, right?
Yeah.
So her mom struggled and eventually got remarried. And this guy was super abusive. She wanted to get a divorce, which was not easy at the time. So Nellie was able to testify for her mom. The judge asked Nellie's opinion. And what was really interesting about this was her testimony was what gave her mother the right to be divorced from her stepfather. And her feeling this, you can imagine, Dave, she feels this sense of, oh, wow, just my words have changed the course of someone's life. I created justice for this person by my own testimony. It's pretty interesting. So as her life gets on and she's doing pretty well in school and she gets older and she's a teenager, well, maybe like late teens, she comes across this article and it's the editor of newspaper making these assumptions about women, that women should be kept in the house. They shouldn't be able to work. They shouldn't be able to, get jobs. And she wrote such a compelling letter back to the editor that he called her in, which he was very nervous about. And to his credit, he gave her a job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So she, in a way, she somehow was instilled these beliefs that in order to that she can make change happen, right?
Yes. Exactly.
So it sounds like she's living in a time where it's very common to it's almost like brainwashing in order to keep the status. Like we always talk about keeping this, society status quo, don't rock the boat. But somehow she was instilled some core beliefs that made her believe that she can instill change, and she does. She actively tries.
Which is wild in a time where women were thought to be mothers and to keep the house, and that's about it. It's where I don't know where she got this sense of ambition, but she had it. She was really something. And to the editor's credit, the male, this is rare too, for him to be like, you know what, that was really well written. And no one could have saw that coming. Like, you're hired. I'm going to put you on my writing team. And this same editor, years later, he's hearing of all these rumors of neglect and abuse in these state asylums, and he says, "Hey, Nellie, this story could be really important." They knew that there's something had to be written about this, and they kind of came up with this idea that Nellie would find a way to get herself committed. But then as she's thinking about it, she's like, all right, well, that's pretty easy. Like, let's be honest. I'm a woman in the 1870s. I could get myself committed.
Yeah.
But then she asked him, how are you going to get me out? And his quote was, I don't know. Basically, I have no idea. I mean, do you want to do this or not? Like, this is a super important thing. They thought that the rumors were exaggerated and they weren't sure what they were going to find. And all he wanted her to do was just give it to me straight. Just tell me what's going on there.
Give me the 411.
Give me the 411 on what's going on in these horrible places.
I don't know what 411 means because phones haven't been invented yet, but I think it's going to mean something soon.
So you think that this would be easy, but where do you start? Right? Now you have your goal. It's like, all right, I have to get myself committed to an insane asylum, which is a very scary thing to do.
Greg, do you think current day you could get yourself committed?
Yeah, there's that saying, like, if the one who can heal you can make you sick. So I think I could probably do a pretty good job of.
I thought you were going to say I can do anything I put my mind to.
Yeah.
And I was going to say I believe in you, Greg.
Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Dave. That means a lot. And so I believe that you could get yourself committed too, Dave.
Oh, I
really
easy.
do. I honestly have no doubt. So what Nellie does to get herself committed is she goes to a boarding house because, one of the things that people are getting sent away for is being poor. So she pretends to be poor. She starts staring off into space and when others are sleeping, she just stays awake and stares at, cockroaches and mice. And she talks about in the book how she thinks of what Robert the Bruce did when he was in prison, just like watching spiders spin their webs all night. I thought that was pretty interesting. She tells people that she has the sorrows. She tells people that she's scared of them. She starts to notice that you can really convince people of your insanity with your eyes, like this blank stare. And just a lot of fake crying. She says she's missing her trunks, which is like, her luggage. Dave, what she's essentially doing is she's becoming really annoying.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that works.
It's listening to her responses to everything is like maddening.
Yeah. Like just I'm missing my trunks. You guys are all insane. Everyone's scaring me. The fake crying. It's like,
so I thought that was an interesting approach that she took. So she used a lot of I'm the sane person. Everybody else around me is crazy as her go-to early on.
Yeah.
She kept saying oh, they're all crazy in there. I was like, that's she was trying to gaslight them.
Yeah. What did you Yeah. But what did you think about that approach? I kind of thought it's a little bit genius.
It's a little bit genius, but I'm also it could have backfired on her. But the way she went about it was I guess it was effective in the way it just seemed very self-unaware.
Right.
That's how she was trying to come off, I think, was I don't understand how people are seeing me. Pretending
all through the book, I have to admit, she does kind of seem out of touch, and she does come from a very wealthy family. So even when she's talking to people when she's in the hospital, she's very dismissive in a sense, and kind of puts herself above everybody else.
Oh, the other part I found to be really surprising too was things surprised her that wouldn't not surprise me, but maybe that's because of our you also have to take into consideration, I guess, what people know about those establishments at that point versus what we know now.
Yeah, well,
she's shocked at some of the stuff that would be
the people back then are thinking those are places where people go to get better and feel better. That's not what's happening there.
Right. And their responses to her, their attitudes to her was she couldn't believe people were talking to her the way they were.
Absolutely. And they would never talk to her like that outside of that, not only because she comes from, and you'll see that in a second here, because after a while at the boarding house, the police come to pick her up. They bring her in front of a judge, and the judge is actually really nice to her. He thinks that she reminds him sort of his sister. She sees that she's well groomed, he says, and she's a lady, and she just seems like maybe someone drugged her.
Yeah.
So what he does,
she's a kid. She's a kid though. She's a kid, in all aspects. She's only 18, 19?
19 years old.
19. Yeah. So she is a kid. So I think that's another thing that plays in her favor with how people are seeing her. Not that it prevents anything necessarily, but I think some people are a little protective of her at first.
Right. And the judge is protective, and he sends her to Bellevue Hospital, which is a regular hospital, but they do have what would you call it? Like a ward. What would they have called it back then? Like an insane ward? I think that's what they do call it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So they send her there, and she's at the regular hospital, and she's already being mistreated by the staff. So there's terrible food there. It's freezing cold. The doctors were only asking her 3 questions. Are you hearing voices? Do you have delusions? Or are you a prostitute? That's all. And they get the answer to those 3 questions. And from there, she's pronounced insane. And before she knows it, she's leaving on a ferry for Blackwell's Island. And she's headed to the, New York's most infamous mental asylum based on the opinion of 4 expert doctors. It's just how, part of me is wow, she had to jump through a lot of hoops to actually get there. But the other side of it is no, not really. I guess not.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because as soon as she gets to Blackwell, she sees this sign as she's walking in, and it says, "If I live, may I have hope." So it's this optimistic thing. But she comes to equate that with Dante's quote in Inferno, where he says, "He who enters abandon all hope." And that's the sign above hell. So those are kind of 2 almost parallel quotes. And it's interesting that that's the sign above that mental hospital where you really should abandon all hope. And we're going to come to see that right now.
Yeah. And, Greg, just a little bit about Blackwell's, which I think is interesting. So a lot of these institutes, initially, a lot of them start off for tuberculosis units. So this one in particular was a hospital for quote unquote incurables. And for a small time, that was like, it was a smallpox hospital. So we think about like how, like its roots, how it's established, and then how it eventually, it's like for people who have severe conditions and are likely to not be cured, right?
It's like the opposite of superheroes. I'm thinking of the Incredibles, but the Incurables have to be something very
The
different.
incurables. But I mean, like even its roots of how it's established and what its intent is isn't necessarily to cure people. It's basically just to isolate people away from society.
But on some level, I think they were built to be comfortable. And they always end up, what always ends up happening is, say they're built for 75 people or 100 people. It always ends up like tripling, quadrupling, having 500 people. This one had thousands. It's a lot of people. So we should talk about some of the things that she starts to see as she gets in there. First thing she notices, it smells horrible.
Sure.
The food is like inedible. It's just terrible. It stinks. It's inedible. But the nurses there would bring their own food and eat it in front of the residents. So it just reminds me of being a kid where you'd be outside and you wouldn't have anything, but some kid would bring like fruit snacks and start eating them right in front of you.
Yeah.
You weren't that kid, were you?
No.
Okay. There was always a kid, like he would bring Gushers and we're like, all right, well, we got nothing out here. That's kind of sad. So it really made me think of that. And another thing, so she's walking into that. The first thing they do is obviously they have to clean them. They have to disinfect them. That's part of, transitioning into any hospital, I think. But she's stripped and she's put into a freezing cold bath, thrown into bed, wet and cold. And in her 10 days there, she would see at least one person die this way. You're being treated like an animal. You're thrown wet and cold onto a mattress with no blankets or anything, just to freeze all night. And in the morning, they'd wake you up and painfully, you're either dead or they painfully comb your hair after it's been kind of frozen. Yeah. I don't know what it's like. I don't have hair. I comb my hair with a face cloth, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different for me. But I mean, Dave, you have the beautiful curly hair. Like that must hurt. That's torture, right? Yeah. She noticed that every door locked separately. I mean, that's gonna be terrible if there's a fire.
Every door locked separately.
Yeah. So if a fire erupted in the building, there's no way that the nurse is gonna go around unlocking every door.
Sure.
So that's really. I mean, that's just something she noticed. Maybe she's a future like fire marshal or something. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But beat and choked people with autism and Down syndrome, that's really dark. And when they are giving them baths, they're bathed one after another in the same tub until the water becomes, this is Nellie's quote, thick. Women were choked for crying, choked for complaining. It's just a really, really terrible scenario over there. Was there anything else you noticed about you were thinking about when you're going through what was going on in Blackwell?
Well, one of the things that I came to mind, and I kind of already alluded to this, but like the interactions I think were interesting. And, this is something that I think is still an issue today when working with individuals who, in general, when you're working with people in general, but especially when you're working with people who have like, fragile mental health things going on, or just, maybe behavioral issues. There's a lot of like hostile and negative attitudes expressed here. Like people actually tell her she's incurable. She's hopeless. They literally say that, but everything is like met with some kind of altercation or confrontation from the orderlies, the staff. Like it's just so negative tone. And in response, what does a patient do? They don't just like keel over, they give it back. So I was like thinking about that. And I was like, wow, that's still an issue today. It's power struggles, right? Mm-hmm. It's just total power struggles. And as as I'm hearing this, I'm like, it's crazy how so much has changed, but yet so much has not changed.
Yeah.
Like simple things like that still exist. We still get issues where, we hear about these terrible interaction styles that happened. And, we just did away like recently with, within the past decade, we did away with like physical restraints, which is crazy. And I understand like why it lingered so long, because that's, safety. But like what we found is when we got rid of them, people became less hostile
Yeah.
overall because they didn't feel threat, you know?
Yeah, Dave, you're talking about that, but the other side of that is the constant talk of hopelessness. You're insane. You're incurable. That really can put some people, if they weren't already hopeless or helpless, they are going to be. You know, that mindset is, oh, maybe after a while you start to believe it. Like, okay, maybe I am hopeless. Maybe I am helpless. It reminds me of the camp life in a way, where Viktor Frankl, there was that one, like I think of, why was Nellie getting through this and being able to navigate this situation so easily? Like, how come she wasn't being affected? Why was there really no fear of her being, like, you know, becoming insane?
Well, she's walking around without that, like, in the back of her mind, like, this is who I am, or this might be who I am. Like, she's not doubting or questioning herself. But you're exactly right. It's like that. She doesn't have that core belief.
She has the purpose, is what she has.
Oh, and she has the purpose too.
You know, that's the thing.
But if she, imagine if she went in there and she had like an inkling of like a belief that maybe there was something wrong with her.
Oh, absolutely. It would be confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Or even worse, Dave, like if she's in there, she's walking around, she has the purpose, she has meaning. Just like in Viktor Frankl's story, where that was that guy who was sure that they were going to be released after Christmas or some date, like in March. And once that date passed, he passed, or like in reality. If Nellie's walking around, she's being completely fine. She's enduring all this, and it's not getting her down because she knows that she's there for a reason. She knows that she's got some purpose. She's working towards something. If at any time she received like a letter, or one of the doctors talked to her and said, I know your editor, and he says, good luck, or something, she had like some kind of interaction like that where her hope was taken away. She all of a sudden knew that she wasn't going to get out. I think she'd be just as vulnerable to go completely insane, like, as everyone else, maybe even more.
Yeah.
It could have turned really dark. She had to put a lot of trust into that editor for sure.
Yeah. And herself.
Oh,
like she believed in herself 1,000%.
Let's talk a little bit about the people she met in the aftermath. She met this woman, Miss Neville, and she remained with her from Bellevue Hospital all the way through. There was a French woman. Both of these women completely sane. They were choked for crying. They were both really good looking. This woman, the French woman, she was the one that was thrown in the cold bath, and she died overnight. So to me, it's the real tragedy is the people that were left behind. Like Nellie was in and out in 10 days. It's really scary.
I want to just kind of like highlight, she saw this in a short duration of time. There is so much more that was going on here that was not caught whatsoever.
No, Dave, she was in essentially what I guess we would call in prison terms. She wasn't in like maximum security. She wasn't in the worst parts. She saw them from a distance, but she wasn't in the worst parts of the hospital by any means. She was in the latest part of the hospital.
And she saw someone die.
And she saw someone die. And she saw people being frozen. She saw people being, beaten, Down syndrome. And
she's in the waiting room pretty much.
Yeah, she's essentially an intake, right? Yeah. She's not even really going to be processed. But because she was there and she got out, there was an inspection of the asylum. A judge ordered that this asylum be inspected, but the problem was they were warned. And when Nellie went there with the authorities to do the inspection, the people that she knew, the women that she knew, were gone. So it's really interesting.
Dunzos.
That's scary. Like, what do you think happened to those women?
Death.
Okay. I mean, maybe you're being a little hyperbolic, but maybe not. Like, they were probably treated worse. Oh, your friend Nellie, ratted us out. Now this is going to happen to you. So I think, in a sense, she was naive to that. I don't know what she thought was going to happen, but in the end, the asylum was awarded $1 million to make conditions better for the residents, and $1 million in 1887.
So they were winning. They won.
Who?
The asylum. They got $1 million.
Yeah, they got $1 million.
This is your big prize, asylum.
Yeah. Well, $1 million in 1887, which is what, a gajillion dollars right now.
Yeah, it's.
And I don't
think like it's infinity amount of money.
I don't think they put water slides in. I don't know what they did, but I doubt that money went to maybe some of it just for optics, but a lot of that money was probably, the people who ran the hospital.
Yeah.
It's just kind of sad. It's kind of sad. It's very sad, actually. This is a place where people went to get better, ultimately.
It's a good thing that like after this happened and the asylum got the $1 million, that like nothing like this ever happened again. It's good that like we made all the adjustments and we fixed how hospitals and asylums ran.
Oh, Dave, you're in a little bit of a mood today. Yeah, when you think
that didn't happen?
When you think of these old-timey asylums with the wicker wheelchairs and the flipped over bed, it's really scary places to think of. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we learned from this, though. For me, the first thing is this really exposes doctors' ability to diagnose mental conditions. Dave, we're dealing with this right now. We see this all the time.
Yeah.
Doctors making calls on patients where, it's a lot more nuanced than just a diagnosis and medicine. It's not something you can decide in a moment because we're seeing people a lot of times on their worst days.
Yeah. But this is the problem with the way the system works. We have to diagnose in order for insurance to bill. Mm-hmm. So you are given the responsibility to formulate a super serious opinion about somebody's mental health after, for us, it's an hour intake?
Yeah. I mean, you have to come up with a diagnosis within that hour. So you're talking, you have to be thinking of it 15, 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
What am I seeing here? It's hard.
On a good case, maybe that person's already seen somebody. You're like, oh, well, I can always go with that one for now.
I always ask, like, have you ever been diagnosed?
Yeah. Because it's like, I'll just put that down for now. And as we get to know each other, I'll let you know if I see anything different.
Yeah.
And that's an easy approach, right? Because, that thing's already on paper. So why add something new if I don't have to?
That's exactly it. I don't want to stigmatize someone's life because they're having a bad day and they're really anxious and maybe they're in a bad spot. And I don't want to give them this heavy diagnosis when, maybe they don't need it. But doctors don't care.
No, they don't. Because so I get it. It's like part of it is the person's going to see them because something's wrong. So there is an expectation that like, hey, something's wrong. I'm not going here.
But if you don't understand OCD and you're having these weird intrusive thoughts that you're going to hurt your family, and you don't understand that it's really not this thing where you're this dangerous person. And now you're talking to a doctor because you feel like in order to keep your family safe, you need to see a doctor, and whatever they say, maybe you need to be committed. Maybe that's what they think about themselves. In reality, they don't know that that thought scaring them isn't who they are. It's highlighting the fact that they do love their families. And, in instances like that, it takes a little more, we got to kind of get to the bottom of these things. Like, where are these coming from? Instead of just the doctor hearing that and saying, oh, geez, all right, let's get this guy off the streets.
Yeah. So I just think like we always talk about, how much thought we put into it and like how much I don't want somebody to be scared when we give them the diagnosis. But I mean, I also have to recognize on the other end of this, of the argument, there's those people that come in and when you tell them the diagnosis, they're relieved.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, all right. That's validation, or that's what it is. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I'm glad to get a name to what it was that's going on. Some people just want to know what's wrong with them. So like, it really isn't just like people being like, oh my God, that's so scary. Sometimes they're like, I thought so. Or whatever.
So I guess something that has changed is we're a lot more hesitant to give the heavy diagnoses first. And back then it seems like if you had any kind of neurosis, you were insane.
Well, it was limited, right? It was
right.
Limited.
There was
slim pickings.
So yeah, slim pickings is right. Good parlance of the times. Good job. The trousers. They only had so many tricks up their trousers or what. I don't know the lingo from back then, but I think the DSM or the amount of mental disorders, there was like 7, and now there's like almost 300. So yeah, right. There were slim pickings.
Yeah.
I think that another thing I noticed in this book is Nellie didn't have any ability to write notes or keep track of anything. And if that were me, I don't think I would have been able to come out and write a book. If I don't write notes for this podcast, Dave, you know that. I don't remember what we're talking about.
So you're saying she fabricated all this?
No, I'm just saying. You
know what, Greg? I agree with you.
Had it been me, I would have been like, if the editor would ask me what happened, I'd be like, I don't know, I forgot everything. I'm just happy to be out.
Yeah.
You know, something interesting. I don't know if this is true or not. And now that I'm, in the position I am now, I don't think it is. But when I was on the boat, we had this story of this guy who he got himself discharged because for a month on the ship, he pretended to be holding a basketball, bouncing a basketball, and there was never anything there. And the story was that, once they got him in the plane to lift him off the aircraft carrier, he did a little motion to throw the ball into the water as if he didn't need it anymore. And I always wondered if that was a true story or not, or if that's just like, people were always thinking of ways like, how do I get out of this? I remember there was this guy called Nailer. I might have told this story, and I apologize if I told it on the podcast before, but he had someone run over his leg with a Jeep so that he could get off the ship, like, so he could never get on it, so he wouldn't have to go on the 6-month cruise.
Yeah.
And the captain made him go on anyway.
Backfire.
Which was rough. You don't want to be on a ship with a broken leg.
Hey,
I mean,
I just want to go back to something you said.
Sure.
You said how like you would have forgotten everything that happened.
I think so.
I don't think so. And here's the thing that surprises me. In our profession, we see like, how many people do you see a week? A lot. I know your caseload is huge. My caseload is pretty big. We remember the tiniest details of these people's lives. And like, sometimes it's someone I see like once a month. Sometimes I see them once a week. And I remember, and like, it's amazing the details you can recall. One week I like struggled trying to remember somebody's like partner's name. And I'm like, oh, I'm slipping. And then I'm like, I just had that moment where I sat back and I'm like, dude, you remember freaking everything. Why let that bother you? It's like, it's crazy to even hold yourself to the standard where you think you're going to remember everything.
You know what?
I really think
thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Like weeks will go by and I'll remember something. Oh, like, yeah, that was the night you guys went to Dave and Buster's or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, how did I remember that? And you're almost sitting there and you're like, in your head, you're like, how did I remember that? You're thinking that, and you're also thinking like, are they appreciating this right now?
So like when we were like early on, when we were doing this, when we first started, there was times where I almost would throw it out there, like something I remembered as like a humble brag, like,
pretty good.
Hey, you like that? I remember,
but in their mind, it's like these relationships that we have with people are intimate in a way, maybe not the right word.
I don't think they would even think twice about the fact that
exactly.
I have had a select few people, like if I forgot something or if I remembered, they will comment on it. So like there are some people that notice, but for the most part, I think a majority of people are kind of like, they don't think twice about it. Like they don't realize like it's super impressive actually.
Yeah.
But,
hey, Dave, what about this though? Because I was thinking, I wonder your thoughts on this. At first I was surprised how easily she was able to get committed. But then I was thinking, in the book, there's like 4 or 5 chances where she could have been like, nah, I'm actually fine. And they would have let her out. But so she did. It was easy, but it wasn't as easy as I guess I thought it would have been.
It felt very much like they were almost at times trying to give her the go to get out of there.
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Almost like, are you sure?
Yeah.
And then she was like sticking to her story. So of course they're gonna, all right, here you go.
Like she asked, like the doctor at one more time, like asked her at Bellevue, he's like, so you hear voices? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, all right. It's almost like you're tying my hands here. Mm-hmm. Like I'm like, he's almost doing that thing where it's
maybe they didn't believe her. Maybe she looked a certain way that just didn't fit into
I think she did. I think she did look a certain way and she talked a certain way. Like she was definitely, of a higher class. But I think they were like, okay, well, either she's really hearing voices or she's faking she's hearing voices to get sent there. And either way, that's insane. So, whatever. I think she found some really good people. But what's interesting in this story is the people, the negative people and the mean people, they were free to do whatever they wanted. Like there was this one nurse Grady, who was in charge, and she was the meanest person. She led all the beatings. She led all the choking. All the mean comments all came from her. And I was thinking, like, she has to be the inspiration for Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She has to be.
You know,
There's-
Greg,
yeah.
you're exactly right.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Are you telling me that because you know that?
No, I'm just making it up.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I think I am right. I'm feeling pretty strongly about that. And I think that I hate that I say that a lot. I'm going to address that. I don't like that I say I think that so much. So
Why?
moving on. I don't.
You should say like I feel statements instead.
I'll try.
I feel that.
I'll try.
I'm feeling that.
And I was listening to other podcasts to see if they do it, and they do it.
Holy crap. You listen to other podcasts?
I'm sorry. No, I just listened to ours over and over again on repeat, like you told me to, Dave. I'm sorry. So this place, Dave, is designed to heal people. It didn't heal people. It made the sick sicker, and it made the sane insane, except for Nelly Bly. I think this puts a lot of stock in that same Frankel idea of if you can find meaning and a why to survive, then the circumstances really don't matter. You can be in any circumstances and still make it through. Nelly Bly is another example of that.
Sure. Now, let's flip that though, because is the issue here that the patients don't have their meaning or their why? Like, we don't know that they're all like dying, actively dying. We don't know that they're all not happy. So I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like, yeah, anyone can survive that, and that's true. Like they'd have to find meaning. They'd have to have a why in order to be able to get through something like that. But here, it's almost, the conditions here are almost worse than the concentration camp stories that Frankel tells in some aspects, because it's nonstop.
It's nonstop. And also, I think they're being told by figures that they're supposed to trust. I don't think the Jews at any point in the concentration camp, not that like we're not comparing. It's just like we're talking.
No, that's what it is. That's what it is.
They didn't think that like, oh, I can trust this SS officer.
Yes,
but
exactly.
You're supposed to be able. This doctor who's supposed to. You're taught from an early age. You're almost conditioned to believe that whatever this guy says is the truth. Whatever this guy says is true, and they're telling you you're hopeless. And I think the key to making meaning in any situation is, I guess you can use that word interchangeably between finding a why and finding hope.
Yeah.
Hope is the key. Without hope, nothing is possible. Hope is the thing.
So the major issues with institutions like this is exactly what we've been saying this whole time. There is no goal to actually improve somebody's health. That's not the goal. The goal is to isolate them away from the regular population of people, right? So the conditions don't matter, and there's no like oversight over the employees because nobody cares. This is literally a population of people pushed out of society and just kept in these gorgeous looking, beautiful buildings.
In your mind,
they are beautiful.
Okay.
All right. So Kirkbride buildings are actually developed. They are designed to have therapeutic elements in the architecture of the buildings. There are wings that are supposed to like face certain windows, like so the light gets in at certain times of the day. There's so much thought that goes into a Kirkbride building, and if you guys don't know what a Kirkbride is, like look that up. It's interesting. But those are like those big, like especially New England asylums, and they are beautiful, and their intention is to help and to heal.
Maybe that's what makes them so scary. It's they're beautiful, but the horrors that went inside the beauty. It's like it reminds me almost of like the Ken and Barbie killers, where they're like these or the Casanova killer too, where it's like this handsome, this beautiful exterior, but it's evil. It's like this weird perversion of beauty.
Sure. I mean, and everything's been exposed, so we know what's happened. And Greg, like our ideas of what was therapeutic and what was helpful was so off for so many, like hydrotherapy tubs. Do you know what a hydrotherapy tub is?
No, I don't think I do.
The tubs that people were basically like forced to be submerged in and that was supposed to be therapeutic. You're like basically being drowned, and that's therapeutic. There's these tubs at Grafton State Hospital, and these are pretty well-known tubs. They are like, they look like these porcelain tubs, and they have these coverings on top of them. So the patients are put into the tub and they're covered. Imagine being put into a tub, submerged in water, and then it's covered. And that's therapeutic.
Now, what do they call? Like they call those like immersion tanks, where you're supposed to like lose sense of gravity where you are, and sensory deprivation, essentially.
Yeah.
I that sounds terrifying to me.
You think about a mentally ill person being put in one of those, or a person with developmental disabilities. Also, there's people who are born in these institutes.
Mm-hmm. She heard babies crying. Yeah, babies crying.
Their parent, one of their parents might be one of the orderlies.
She's like, this baby won't stop crying. Insane. Lock them up.
Well, they're born because their mom is in the institute, and there's a lot of rape and other sexual assaults and abuse, and it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
And you know what? There is something that goes hand in hand with that. The people maybe justify their actions and their treatment of these people. She mentions something about, she quotes it as the repulsive form of charity imposed. But what she's saying is, over and over again, you see in this text how people on charity, they shouldn't expect to be treated well. They shouldn't expect that their care be, good food and, nice clothes, not nice clothes, but warm, dry clothes, whatever. You shouldn't be expecting anything good because it's free. That's a theme throughout this whole book. And I think that kind of continues. And it's hard because, when you see like homeless, where they put the homeless people, it's always like an armory or some abandoned building. They're like, oh, everyone should just be happy to be there. And it's like, I mean, would you be? It's like, I see both sides of that, and it's difficult to find the money for all that, but they're people. Just because it's charity doesn't mean it has to be shitty.
And just because you find a location to put people doesn't mean it stops there, because you also have to make sure that the conditions inside are safe. Yeah. And that's like what you're talking about with homeless people. I've actually heard homeless people say there was no way I would ever go stay at a shelter because it's not safe to stay.
It's not safe. It's dangerous. It's,
and look at what we're looking at now in this story. We're putting people in a place, all together where they should be taken care of, but the conditions are not safe. And that's not help. I also think the interesting thing is, if you think about it, like, assuming Nellie has some privilege, like maybe she came from some money, she seems like she has some kind of status, right?
Yeah, just the way she speaks and the way she writes, it's like, this isn't just some,
I think it's interesting how she can maintain perspective of the individuals there. Like, she can still see the humanity in them. But I also wonder if it's because she's probably, and this is a big assumption, we're kind of assuming maybe her financial status. But I wonder if she's also kind of separate from them in her real life. Whereas, like, if you think about the people that are working here, I'm assuming they're not millionaires working within the hospital. Mm-hmm. They probably have more exposure to people with mental illness and disabilities. And they probably don't, it's like that hierarchy thing. I'm trying to be careful with my words. It's probably like, I'm above you.
Yeah.
Whereas Nellie doesn't feel threatened by them because
just the way she
has status.
Dave, in the books, the way she talks to the doctors, if like the doctor does something to one of the girls, she'll be like, "Sir, you cannot treat people that way." And no one else.
And he's like, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?"
Yeah. You
know who this person is? Yeah. Of course, I can talk to them that way. That's right. What he's thinking. So
she has this sense of entitlement throughout, with the knowledge, I'm getting pulled out of here and.
Yes.
In about a week.
Yeah. She others herself without, like, in just a different way than how they do it. And like, thank God she does, because like, obviously the work she's doing is important. It does create some change. And it also inspires other people down the road, which
100%.
I mentioned off air how that famous Geraldo investigation in 1972 into Willowbrook State School. If you've never seen that, look that up on YouTube. But like, talk about poor conditions in the 70s. Again, same thing. We're overpopulating these buildings. So this was a state school, a little bit different, but it's, there's children, there's adults, they're naked, they're unattended. So anything is happening. There's sexual assaults, there's, violence, aggression. They're just left to their own devices. There's no development. There's kids that are like so far behind the developmental stages. And Geraldo goes in and exposes all this. And I have to think has to be inspired by Nelly Bly. Like, she is that first reporter to kind of do this.
Dave, when I was in undergrad at PC, we learned about investigative journalists, and the example given was Upton Sinclair. He wrote The Jungle, and this was a book that exposed the meatpacking plants and the disgusting conditions and what we were eating.
Yeah.
And what was, after that came out, when they started grading the meat, like, this is grade A beef, whatever. And that was written. So he went in, he exposed that, he did this expose, and that was in 1905. So 10 Days in a Madhouse, written by Nelly Bly, was written in 1887. So when it comes to investigative journalists and exposing these institutions that are that are either getting away with something, or, we're infiltrating Bitcoin, we're infiltrating Wall Street, what happened with the crash in 2008. Like, anytime you see someone getting inside information from, something that's, pulling the wool over the public's eyes and mistreating people or mistreating funds or people or food or whatever it is, this all started with Nelly Bly.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable. And so, we take some things away from her. Maybe she certainly wasn't perfect. But I'll tell you what, without her, this is like a hero for change and
feminism in general.
Yeah, feminism. Like, she is just like, after reading this, I have this wow for her. Why is she not taught?
I wonder if she was kind of discarded early on, or kind of discredited because she was a female.
Well, I would say early on, yeah. But now, people need to hear this story. People have been ripping off this story and building on her work for up until now. Like, it's so hard for me to think of like exposés, but there's thousands of them. They happen all the time. We got this politician's emails, or we got, we exposed this text messages of this group and this, this celebrity, whatever. This all started here. This is like, people stayed at each other's stuff, and then institutions were just blindly trusted. Government was just blindly trusted. Medicine was just blindly trusted until someone said, I don't know, this seems a little off. Yeah. And then things changed.
Agreed.
So, that's all I have about Nelly Bly. I think, people should dig in. And I do recommend this book. It's so short. It's not like, I think I read it and I was expecting to hear some real dark, gritty, like, atrocities, but this is plenty. This is nonfiction. This is what was going on. Yeah. And this is just scratching the surface.
So it does look like there are some films inspired by Nelly Bly, this Nelly Bly story, if people would like to check them out. I think that there's actually one with Christina Ricci.
Really?
Or I don't know if that's real. I haven't seen any of them, to be honest with you. But I kind of just briefly looked, and I thought I saw something as Christina Ricci playing her. But
well, I guess One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is taking a lot from this.
Yeah.
In fact, I think they might be using the same hospital. I read that somewhere. But Nurse Ratched is the real Nurse Grady.
I'm trying to figure out if the ruins so Blackwell's Island is actually Roosevelt Island.
Roosevelt Island, yeah, New York.
And I know that there were some ruins. I don't know if they're still up now So I think there might be some spots to check out, but you'd probably you want to look those up before you go take a ride, I would say.
Dave, that's right up your alley, though.
Yeah, if it's ruins, though, it's just kind of like just a structure.
Yeah.
You can't go in.
But to take the same steps that she took in the same areas, maybe to see that quote above on the wall, that'd be amazing.
That'd be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool. And we do know that, we used a lot of names here, but while she was in the asylum, she went by the name Nelly Brown. I know people are going to be like, hey, you didn't mention that, but we know. We get it. We just went by Nelly. Whoa, now.
Because that really doesn't matter.
It doesn't, does it? It doesn't. But that's it for me, Dave. What do you think? You got anything else?
That sounds good. I really think that there will probably be an expansion of this topic. I know we've tossed around an idea in the past that I think we're probably going to have to revisit at some point. Just exploring the idea of institutions and conditions and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll be able to have maybe not a part 2 of Nelly Bly's story, but a part 2 of like the topic of these
asylums.
Yeah,
which I think people are interested in, and actually old timey diagnosis, like these kinds of things. It's kind of interesting. But yeah. So thanks everybody for listening and tuning in and just hanging with you boys. We've appreciated it.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys today,
and always,
forever.
And if you do appreciate us, please leave a review and 5 stars. Even if you don't like it, write some horrible thing and then 5 stars.
I'll edit that one out. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We will be back next week. Keep on tuning in. Keep on sending us suggestions. We will probably do them.
Probably.
Most likely. Have a great day, great night, great evening, great life. Good times forever.
Okay, Dave.
Amen.
Amen.
Good night.